My sister introduced me to her new mother-in-law as the assistant helping our photographer today at her own wedding reception, gesturing vaguely toward the camera equipment slung over my shoulder. While I stood there in the dress I'd bought specifically to attend her wedding as her sister, not as hired help. 8 months later, the photograph I took that day, the one my sister had specifically asked me not to bother taking because she'd already hired real professionals, appeared on the cover of a nationally distributed bridal magazine, my name printed clearly in the photo credit line beneath it. A lifetime of being the less impressive daughter. My name is Priya, and I was 29 years old at the time of my younger sister Anjali's wedding in April 2023, working, at that point, as a moderately successful freelance photographer specializing in editorial and fine art portraiture, a career I had built slowly and deliberately over the preceding 7 years after leaving a considerably more conventional path in marketing. I need to explain the specific family dynamic that made my sister's wedding day introduction land with such particular weight, because it represented, in many ways, the culmination of a pattern our family had maintained for most of our adult lives. Anjali, 2 years younger than me, had followed a path our parents considered considerably more legible and impressive. A degree in finance, followed by a steady, well-compensated career at a major investment firm, followed by her engagement, at 26, to a man named Rajiv, whose own family occupied a prominent, socially significant position within our broader community. My own path, by contrast, had unfolded in ways our parents, and Anjali herself, had rarely bothered to fully understand or take seriously. I had left a stable marketing position in 2016 to pursue photography full-time, a decision that had, for the first several years, produced genuinely precarious, inconsistent income while I built my portfolio and reputation. A period our family had treated, consistently, as an extended, indulgent hobby rather than a genuine, serious career trajectory. By 2023, my actual professional reality had shifted considerably from those early, uncertain years. I had built a genuinely successful career shooting editorial work for several regional publications, along with a growing specialty in fine art wedding photography that had, by that point, earned me recognition within professional photography circles that my own family remained, largely, entirely unaware of. How the wedding photography situation developed. Anjali's wedding planning process, unfolding across most of 2022 and into early 2023, had involved a considerable, visible investment in every possible detail, an elaborate venue, an extensive guest list, and notably, the hearing of a well-regarded wedding photography studio that Anjali and her mother-in-law had selected together, at what I understood, through family conversation, to be a considerable expense. I had offered, early in the planning process, to contribute my own photography as a sibling's gift, an offer I made genuinely, without any expectation of formal compensation, simply wanting to offer something meaningful for my sister's significant day. Anjali's response to this offer, delivered with what I now recognize as characteristic dismissiveness toward my professional work, was polite but unmistakably clear. "That's sweet, Priya, but we've already hired real professionals for this. I don't want to risk anything less than perfect for photos this important. I want to be honest that this specific framing, real professionals, implicitly distinguishing the photographers she'd hired from my own genuine professional practice, stung considerably, though I chose, at the time, not to escalate the moment into a larger confrontation, telling myself, as I frequently had across years of similar dismissiveness, that preserving family harmony mattered more than defending my professional credibility to a sister who had rarely bothered to actually examine it. I attended the wedding itself as a guest, in the dress I'd purchased specifically for the occasion, though I did, admittedly, bring my personal camera along, a habit so deeply ingrained in my professional identity that leaving it behind entirely, even at a family event, felt genuinely unnatural. The introduction, the specific moment that would eventually reshape this entire story, occurred during the wedding reception, when Anjali's new mother-in-law, Kavita, approached our small family group, curious about the camera equipment I was carrying, having noticed me taking occasional, casual photographs throughout the reception. "And this is?" Kavita asked, gesturing toward me, clearly uncertain of my relationship to the wedding party given the camera equipment. Anjali's response arrived quickly, before I had the chance to introduce myself directly. "Oh, that's just the assistant helping our photography team today," she said, gesturing vaguely toward my camera. "She's been getting some backup shots for us." I stood there, in the dress I'd worn specifically as Anjali's sister rather than as hired help, absorbing a specific, unmistakable moment of being reduced, in front of her new mother-in-law, to hired assistants rather than acknowledged as family. I did not correct the introduction in that specific moment, choosing, in the immediate context of my sister's wedding reception, not to create an uncomfortable scene by directly contradicting her characterization in front of her new in-laws. But the moment settled into me with a specific, lasting weight, joining what I now recognize as a long-standing pattern of my family minimizing or misrepresenting my actual professional identity, whenever it proved socially convenient to do so. The photograph I took. I want to describe the specific photograph that would eventually become significant to this story's outcome, because the circumstances of actually capturing it matter for understanding what followed. Later that evening, during a quiet moment when the hired photography team had stepped away to change equipment and reposition for the reception's final formal moments, I noticed Anjali and Rajiv standing together near the venue's outdoor garden area, caught in a genuine, unguarded moment of quiet affection, Anjali's head resting against Rajiv's shoulder, both of them watching the sunset without any awareness of being observed, entirely unposed. Entirely authentic in a way that formal wedding photography, however technically accomplished, often struggles to capture. I raised my own camera, adjusted quickly for the specific lighting conditions, and captured the image in a handful of frames before either of them noticed me. A photograph that, even in the moment of taking it, I recognized as genuinely, technically excellent, capturing something considerably more emotionally resonant than the more posed. Formal images, the hired photography team, had been producing throughout the earlier portions of the reception. I did not mention this specific photograph to Anjali or anyone else at the wedding, uncertain, given the day's earlier, assistant, comment, whether sharing it would be genuinely welcomed or simply dismissed as further evidence of my presumptuous overreach into professional territory. Anjali had explicitly told me was already covered by real professionals. What I did with the photograph. I want to explain the professional path this photograph eventually traveled, because the specific mechanism through which it reached national publication reflects genuine professional merit rather than any deliberate scheme on my part to embarrass or upstage my sister. Several months after the wedding, working through my ordinary professional practice of submitting portfolio work to relevant industry publications, I included that specific candid photograph, with names and identifying wedding details appropriately anonymized per standard practice, since I hadn't yet sought or received Anjali's permission to use it more specifically, in a broader submission to a national bridal and lifestyle magazine that regularly featured a rotating selection of candid, editorial-style wedding photography from independent photographers across the country. The magazine's editorial team, reviewing submissions for their upcoming issue, focused specifically on candid, unposed wedding photography as a growing trend within the industry, selected my photograph. The genuine, unguarded image of Anjali and Rajiv watching the sunset together, as their cover image for that issue, a considerable professional honor within the specific niche of editorial wedding photography that I had spent years working to build a reputation within. I want to be direct that I did not immediately connect this professional opportunity back to my family, initially treating the submission and selection process as simply another entry in my ongoing, independent professional practice, separate from the specific family dynamics surrounding the wedding itself. The magazine cover. The magazine issue featuring my photograph was published in December 2023, roughly 8 months after Anjali's wedding, and it was, notably, Anjali herself who first encountered the cover, browsing a bookstore's magazine section and recognizing, with what she would later describe to me as genuine shock. Her own wedding day image, unmistakably identifiable despite the professional anonymization I'd applied to more explicit identifying details. Staring back at her from a national magazine's cover. She called me that same evening, her voice carrying a complicated mixture of confusion and gradually, as the conversation unfolded, something closer to genuine astonishment. "Priya," she said, "I need you to explain something to me. I just saw our wedding photo, the one of Rajiv and me watching the sunset, on the cover of a magazine at the bookstore. Your name is in the photo credit. Can you please explain what's happening?" I explained, as clearly and factually as I could manage, the actual sequence of events, capturing the candid image during a quiet moment at her reception, submitting it as part of my ongoing professional portfolio practice months later, and the magazine's independent editorial decision to select it for their cover based entirely on its artistic and emotional merit, unconnected to any family relationship or deliberate attempt to leverage her wedding for professional advancement. "I didn't do this to embarrass you or make a point," I told her honestly. "I took that photograph because it was a genuinely beautiful, authentic moment, and I submitted it to a magazine the same way I submit any strong work from my portfolio. I didn't expect it to be selected for the cover specifically, and I certainly wasn't trying to somehow prove a point about the assistant comment from your reception, even though, if I'm honest, that comment has stayed with me considerably longer than I think you probably realize." Anjali's reckoning. The conversation that followed, extending well beyond that initial phone call into several subsequent, increasingly honest exchanges over the following weeks, became, unexpectedly, one of the more significant reckonings our family had experienced in years. "I think I need to actually sit with the fact," Anjali told me during one of these later conversations, "that a photograph you took casually, almost as an afterthought, at my own wedding, ended up being considered more compelling by an actual national magazine's editorial team than anything the professional photographers I specifically hired, at considerable expense, managed to capture that same day. I don't think I've ever actually taken your work seriously, Priya. Not really. I think I've spent years treating your career as this indulgent hobby you happen to be pursuing instead of a real, genuinely accomplished professional path. And introducing you as the assistant at my own wedding was, I think, just the most visible, embarrassing example of an attitude I've apparently been carrying for a very long time." I appreciated this admission considerably, while also being honest, in my response, about the specific, accumulated weight of years of similar dismissiveness that had preceded that particular wedding day comment. "This isn't really about the one comment at your wedding," I told her. "It's about years of our family treating my actual career as somehow less legitimate than yours, simply because it didn't follow the same conventional, easily explainable path. I need you to understand that pattern clearly, not just apologize for one specific, unusually visible moment of it." "What changed in our family?" "I want to be honest about the specific, gradual shifts that followed this magazine cover situation, rather than suggesting an instant, complete transformation in how my family understood and valued my professional work." Anjali, to her credit, made a genuine, sustained effort in the months that followed to actually engage with my professional work more seriously, asking specific, informed questions about my ongoing projects, attending a gallery exhibition featuring some of my fine art portrait work later that year, and notably, actively correcting extended family members and friends who continued to describe my career in the same dismissive terms she herself had previously used. Our parents, once the magazine cover situation became known more broadly across our extended family, similarly began engaging with my career with a level of genuine curiosity and pride that had been largely absent throughout the preceding 7 years of my professional practice. A shift that, while genuinely welcome, also carried a complicated undertone, given how directly it seemed connected to external, third-party validation rather than any deeper, independent reassessment of my work's merit on its own terms. I addressed this specific dynamic directly with my mother during one conversation that spring. "I appreciate that you're proud of this magazine cover," I told her, But I need you to understand that my work was equally legitimate 7 years ago, when I first left my marketing job, as it is now that a magazine has validated it publicly. I'd like our family's respect for my career to be based on the actual work, not just on whether it happens to receive visible, external recognition you can point to at family gatherings. Epilogue. It has been just over a year since that magazine cover was published, and my relationship with Anjali, while still genuinely working through the accumulated weight of years of professional dismissiveness, has moved into a considerably more honest, mutually respectful place than existed before that wedding reception introduction. I have continued building my career in the time since, taking on increasingly significant editorial and fine art commissions, including, notably, a second national publication feature the following year that arrived through my own ongoing professional reputation, rather than any connection to my sister's wedding specifically. A distinction that mattered considerably to me, wanting my career's continued growth to be understood clearly as the product of genuine, sustained professional skill, rather than a single, fortunate coincidence. I think often about the specific, almost absurd irony of how this entire situation unfolded. A photograph taken quietly, almost incidentally, during a moment when I'd been formally relegated to assistant status at my own sister's wedding, eventually reaching a level of professional recognition that the real professionals she'd specifically hired instead of trusting my own work never quite achieved with any of their own images from that same day. I don't think that irony was ever the point, and I've tried, across the past year, not to let it become the primary lesson I take from this entire experience. What actually matters to me, considerably more than any specific vindication regarding that magazine cover, is that my family has finally begun engaging with my professional identity as genuinely, seriously legitimate. Not because a magazine told them it was, but because, having finally been forced to look closely enough to notice, they've started, gradually, to actually see the work itself clearly, rather than continuing to filter it through years of unexamined assumption about which of their daughters' careers deserved to be taken seriously. In the end,